Silvertop here. Oh, thanks very much. Right, so if you could state your name, please, and organisation.
My name is Andrew Gilmartin. I'm currently General Manager of Silvertop Taxis.
Thank you. And maybe you could give us a general statement by way of opening statement. Thank you, Mr. Gilmartin.
Yes, look, Professor Fells, Dr Cousins, members of the inquiry, I welcome the opportunity to address you on behalf of Silvertop and trust that our input will be considered in your final report. Shortly after the inquiry was announced, I met with members of your team and indicated that Silvertop would be a participant in the preparation of submissions that the Victorian Taxi Association would undertake addressing the terms of reference and ultimate recommendations relevant to operations of taxis in the Metropolitan Taxi Zone. Silvertop has, throughout the period of the inquiry, directly engaged with the inquiry team on a diverse range of network issues, including call processing, routing, automation, etc., and has complied with onerous and costly data extractions relating to millions of taxi pre-bookings, as well as rank and street hails. We therefore endorse the VTA's response to your interim report as an appropriate representation of our views regarding your draft recommendations. Silvertop welcomes sustainable reform where it can be clearly demonstrated that such reform will deliver practical outcomes. I'd just like to take a few moments now to address some of the major recommendations of your report. From our perspective, the inquiry's draft report lacks quite a bit of modelling that supports the likely outcomes of its taxi and hire car licensing proposals. However, contained in the report, there's quite a bit of data and information which can be used to demonstrate, or clearly demonstrate, that the unlimited release of licences at $20,000 per annum, coupled with a 60-40 revenue split in favour of drivers, will in the short term render multi-car operations virtually unviable. In an effort to survive, massive downward pressure will be exerted by multi-car operators and indeed all assignees, forcing encumbered licence holders into extreme financial hardship and quite possibly insolvency. The Melbourne Metropolitan Taxi Zone is serviced by a significant number of taxis that are operated by multi-car owners.
Excuse me, I don't want to interrupt you, but multi-car, you mean
I'm not talking about networks, I'm talking about operators who operate more than one vehicle.
Okay, good.
Right? Just to take that a stage further to give some substance to that, as far as Silvertop is concerned, the fleet, there are over 1,100 cars in that fleet that are operated by 200, 220 odd owners. In other words, there is a tremendous proportion of the fleet which is operated by either licence holders or assignees of more than one particular licence.
Yeah.
So you've got about, what is it, approaching 2,000 in total?
Yes, 1,900 to 2,000, depending upon just how far you take it. You know, if you include West Suburban and so forth. But as far as the actual Silvertop fleet is concerned, recalling from memory, it is between 1,100 and 1,200 cars that are operated by multi-car owners at this point.
And the balance?
And the balance, of course, and it's worthwhile to note that the balance, the 700 odd cars, are operated by licence holders, either themselves or in conjunction with a Bailey driver, or indeed some of those single licence holders, or licensed single car operators, may not drive the car themselves. They may be driven by two Bailey drivers. So, in essence, it's important to acknowledge that fact, because the vast majority of cars that operate, certainly as far as Silvertop is concerned, are operated by Bailey drivers. There's no question about it. If you look at the number of shifts over the week and the number of cars given the break-up as I've just described. It's very important that the preservation of fleet operation, or I should say the preservation of fleet operations, is an absolute must to ensure ongoing 24/7, round-the-clock supply of service to the public. There's no question about that. As an alternative to an unrestricted release of licences, there now exists something that we've never really had in the past, and that is there exists reliable industry data and, of course, a wide range of indices which we believe should be used by government to periodically adjust taxi numbers in response to the demand or the growth as far as that demand is concerned. In addition, we support the Taxi Association's proposal that existing assignment arrangements be capped at around about $2,400 a month or thereabouts, adjusted annually in line with CPI, and that the Taxi Services Commission should control a blind transfer system for the transfer of licences and the matching of new assignments. Indeed, just going back to what the previous presenter said, we at Silvertop have always maintained that providing an assignee is meeting his commercial arrangements with the assignor, then he should enjoy first right of refusal once his assignment comes up for renewal. We've always maintained that. And that's why I say that the Commission has really only got to be concerned about matching new assignments with new assignees. Or if an existing assignee decides not to renew his licence assignment, then that licence would go into the pool and be matched with someone who's prepared to pay whatever the government set fee is for it. Without question, it's essential that drivers be better remunerated. There's no question about that, as it's, well, somewhat of an anomaly that in terms of, let's say, distance charges, 4 people in a taxi can travel the length of Collins Street for less than the same 4 people catching a tram, and that's just not right. There's something wrong there when you consider those people are hopping into a taxi, they've got a dedicated driver, etc., and the difference in those fares is quite substantial, and I think that's wrong. We believe that improved driver remuneration should be achieved by an appropriate fare increase and a fare restructure distributed between the operator and the driver on a 50-50 basis, embodied in a mandated bailment agreement which incorporates all but .1 of your recommendation, 6.15. Silvertop supports your recommendations in pursuit of better quality drivers. Now, turning towards our role as a network service provider, Silvertop operates a world-class taxi communication and fleet administration centre, providing the public of Melbourne with an on-demand access to safe and reliable taxi travel. Our system successfully dispatches millions of taxi passenger bookings each year to in excess of 2,000 cars spread across the many hundreds of square kilometres that constitute the metropolitan taxi zone. Mandatory affiliation is a key factor in achieving this wide spatial coverage and reliable response to requests for taxi services at any location and time of day. There's no question in our mind that to cover the breadth of this taxi zone, we need as many possible cars on that network as we possibly can have. Furthermore, mandatory affiliation ensures that every trip, indeed every taxi movement, is tracked and recorded to enable recourse to journey details should later issues arise relating to lost property, passenger and driver safety, or regulation and law enforcement. Experienced staff, some of whom are former drivers and are very cognizant of what drivers face out there in the field, monitor all the alarm activations from within the fleet and provide immediate support to any driver in distress. Every alarm activation is carefully assessed to determine whether or not police and emergency services need to attend, and in my more than 30 years involvement in fleet management, I've never heard a driver come to me and tell me that about a failed or inadequate network response to a distress signal activation. I've had drivers experience all sorts of problems of a night and so forth, but I have never had a driver come to me and say I was deserted by the system. Now, the inquiry team, indeed, the team expressed to me at one stage in other consultation that we've had that they'd like to come and visit the call centre and spend time there during a period of peak demand. And I thought that would have been very, very worthwhile indeed. There's a tremendous amount of activity that goes on during those late shifts when drivers are faced with situations, work's being covered, and I think it was very important to understand just how that centre works and see it firsthand, sit in, not just a casual look in, couple of minutes here and there, but to sit in and see the activities of the organisation over a period of a couple of hours of peak demand. Now, I was very disappointed, I've got to say, when that opportunity wasn't followed up on by the team members. Now, obviously, I know you've got limited time and so forth, but I think it's very important to understand and see it firsthand just how people deal with situations, as I say, involving driver security and so forth. Depot fees, there's been a lot said, there's been a lot of comment on the costs and so forth that operators are forced to pay networks and so forth. Depot fees paid by operators to Silvertop are lower than those charged by comparable networks, no question about that. And they have risen at a rate which is 4% lower than the aggregate increase in CPI, that's CPI Melbourne, for the past 8 years. Now, I don't know, I do everything in my power to control budgets. I've got a workforce in that call centre, an administration of up to about 130, 140 people. And we do everything we can to constrain our overheads, and I can assure you that Silvertop makes a very nominal profit when it's all boiled down. And I can't see the justification when you've got we've got high labour costs and we've got considerable technology. There's no question in my mind that the fees that we charge are quite appropriate. The inquiry has made a number of recommendations relating to service delivery by networks, including the introduction of target KPIs, the empowering of customers, and the establishment of central booking service for wheelchair accessible taxis. We at Silvertop we see no problem in these proposed target KPIs. The vast majority of bookings are made on an on-demand basis and serviced by the first available car. We note the concern that you've expressed regarding timed pre-bookings, and we're investigating changes to our dispatch methods and more effective sanctions, etc., to assist us in better meeting the expectations of those particular customers. With respect to the establishment of a central booking service for Watts, all I can really say there is that it should be borne in mind that that concept failed miserably in Victoria in the past, and I believe it should only be considered when some truly detailed modelling demonstrates advantages and viability for all the parties concerned. I know that there are models interstate that are probably worth close scrutiny, but as I say, I really haven't seen anything that clearly demonstrates that a central booking service is going to be the panacea for that section of the market. The introduction of industry accreditation some 4 years ago was intended to raise industry accountability through a concept of shared responsibility. Now, instead we have a situation of confused responsibility in lots of cases. The roles of all the stakeholders, we feel, need to be clearly defined, and the regulator concerned with compliance with the law, safety, issues like that, and the networks in conjunction with their operators with the quality of service delivery. In closing, I'll just reiterate the statement I made very earlier on, that Silvertop will readily embrace sustainable reform that clearly enhances the delivery of safe and reliable taxi travel to the people of Melbourne. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, a few questions. Maybe I'll just ask you a kind of philosophical question at the beginning about the comments really on the licences, I guess. Like, there are very, very few industries where there is an outright restriction on the number of people that can participate in it.
Yes.
Normally, we leave these things to the market.
Right.
And of course, where there's a safety issue or a driver quality issue, you test them and have arrangements for that. But, I mean, we're taking a long-term view of the taxi industry in this inquiry. We have to worry about immediate impact, but really this is setting the scene for 10 or 20 years ahead. So why would you want to have a setup where there's restriction on the number of people who can come into the industry, a denial of opportunity to them by the way? What is it about the industry that restricts the numbers? What is the rationale?
Well, I think this industry is all about people, right? It's all about people. It's about people come into this industry. They've come into a highly regulated environment, and they've worked hard. They've invested in it, right? And honestly and truly, they've delivered a service to the public, and I think they've bought licences and so forth with a view to seeing them through their retirement and so forth. There's a lot of people in that particular situation, and really and truly, I think people have to be taken into account here, and not just numbers when it's all boiled down. That's clearly something that has to be taken into account. This, to turn around and say this is you're looking at reform. Quite frankly, I think we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater and really going back to square one and starting again. You know, this business to say, well, we're not taking anybody's licence from them. You can still assign your licence and you can get a reasonable return, but the reality is this, that with that 60-40 proposition that's been put forward in conjunction with the $20,000 licences, as I said earlier on, multi-car operators can't survive. You can't put, I can't see where the market is going to grow sufficiently in the short term to see the average takings of a car at 28 or 2,900 suddenly jump up to 36 and 37 across the fleet. I can't see that. I can't see that happening. And as I say, so what will happen? Who can the assignee of a licence turn to especially a multi-car operator? The only people he can turn to is the holder of the perpetual licence. He can't go back to the government. You've said your licence is $20,000. So immediately there's that downward pressure that I referred to earlier on. And pushing it down, ultimately these licences will be worth absolutely nothing in the next, in quite a short period of time. And I think that's grossly wrong.
So, given this financial picture you're painting, do you expect people to actually enter the industry when it's gone through this financial crisis? I mean, it sounds as if it would be a terrible industry ever to dream of paying $20,000 a year for a licence, getting a car, running a business.
Well, I find
Will there be a flood of people coming into this?
Well, I find it hard to, without a lot more consideration, to work out what the likely impact will be when you take into account your pre-booked only hire car changes. I am concerned, as I said, about the multi-car operator. Some of it is very hard to try and define a clear picture on just. I think there will be quite a bit of chaos in the medium term, which doesn't augur well for what this really this inquiry is all about, is trying to lift service and so forth to the public, and it concerns me very much.
On the pricing question, you've mentioned fares going up. Now, the inquiry evidence tended to suggest that demand is fairly elastic, that is, 10% price rise, 10% fall in patronage. So there's some worries about, you suggested, drivers need better pay, so put up fares, and the drivers would benefit. So A, what will be the effect on patronage of fare increases, and B, would it flow through to drivers, or would it just lead to bigger rise in licence values?
I can't. I think first of all, if the return on licences was capped, then with a 50-50 bailment arrangement, if there was a 10-15% increase in fares, then you get a 10 or 15% increase, obviously, in the driver's remuneration. You see, I think, and there's been a bit of a generalisation here. In the past, there have been some licence assigners, I say some and not all, that have linked their assignment fees or increases in their assignment fees to any increase in the fare structure. Now that's, I say some, certainly not all, but you can put paid to that by capping the assignment fee. And I think that, we've got to look at the fare structure. It is quite inadequate at the moment. When you can compare it to a comparable market, say in New South Wales, we're about 30% behind the fare structure in New South Wales. And as I've tried to demonstrate to the inquiry with that short example of a trip in the city, the structure of fares is wrong at this point in time as well.
You referred to the investment that Silvertop have in the call centre, and we did visit the call centre, of course, and we're grateful that you agreed to our request for that. I guess one thing that concerns me about that is whilst I understand that the economics of the thing, the more people you have affiliated, the easier it is to pay for something like that. Perhaps the question is, what value do people get from it?
Well,
so we've just heard from some people, for example, who suggest that they get very few bookings from the networks, and overall, I suppose one of the key bits of data that the inquiry actually turned up, because we kept being told that bookings were half the market, but in fact, when we eventually got the data, what we found that bookings through the networks were only 30%. So how is mandatory affiliation really justified in the context that people really are not getting much value out of it?
I would dispute that. You've got the figures, you've looked at it, you said overall around about 30%. Now, the situation is there are some drivers who will take every opportunity, take every booking that comes their way. Other drivers won't. For reasons best known to them, they want to operate in the hail and rank market. That's entirely up to them. And as you know, I've demonstrated to you here, we've contained our costs, and you know, even and we're heavily subsidising the training of drivers at this point in time. I don't believe at Silvertop we're offering a lot of services to drivers and operators that they don't want or they don't need. There's no bundling as far as I'm concerned. That's another statement that's been made about networks. It doesn't apply at Silvertop. You know, I don't think there's any justification for that. You know, there's a finite level in the market. There's a finite number of bookings that can be handled by the fleet at different times of the day, and you know, I don't think an operator can afford, in the main, to not be affiliated with a network if 30 to 35% of his revenue comes from that source. The way I see it.
You referred to the night situation. One of the things that we also discovered was that at night time, when demand exceeds available cabs, that the phone systems don't work. They just ring out. Why is that?
All right, let's be realistic about this. You know, there is a finite number of cars on the road, and when those cars are occupied, whether they're occupied by rank and hail work or already pre-booked work, what is the point of just taking more and more phone calls that can't be serviced? You know, the whole idea of the running of a call centre is to match the inbound volume of work with your ability to service it. Now, you know, we can run up a tremendous amount of costs just answering the phone and telling people that there are no cars available. Every time someone on a mobile, we've reached saturation point, if we just let them, if we answer those calls, they immediately incur charges as far as the individual is concerned, and then they're told, I'm afraid you'll have to ring back, there's no car available. Far better to give that person an engaged signal as far as I'm concerned. You know, they don't need to have terribly high intelligence to work out that if they're getting an engaged signal, the situation has reached saturation point. That's my view.
We've heard a lot of talk about smartphone applications in the inquiry, and interested in your view on what impact that might have on the sort of major networks. I mean, have you created a dinosaur?
Well, as far as applications are concerned, look, we're the first to recognise that communication technology is moving forward at a massive rate, at a great rate. Now, there's all sorts of applications out there. There's these dating, what we call dating type applications, which introduce drivers to passengers and vice versa. There's applications that we deploy that introduce a person to the overall dispatch system. Now, look, this technology is moving forward. It is hard to predict just what the ultimate effect will be. And but when we see that over a period of time, we will gain a better picture on what the impact is, and things like mandatory affiliation and so forth, they could possibly be reviewed completely in 4 or 5 years' time. But I think it's quite premature to suddenly say, oh, there's a whole lot of applications out there now and the internet, and we don't need this universal access via telephone. The vast majority of bookings come in that way via telephones at this point in time, and I can see that will be the case for the next 2 to 3 years at least, while these other technologies evolve.
You made reference to the central booking service and the failure of the past attempts there. Can you tell us a bit more about that, why they were failures, and what we would do to make it successful this time?
Well, put it this way, I wasn't directly involved with the establishment, I should say, of the original central booking service. But its failure was quite an embarrassment to the government of the day. In fact, it was Silvertop and Black Cabs, as I recall. I wasn't in a management role with this organisation at that particular time, but they virtually came to the aid, I think, of that sector of the market and the government to get a system back on track. And at that point in time, I think there was great cooperation between the Department of Transport and the two companies. There were links put in place for the exchange of work between the two, and there was a recognition, based on the problems that had faced the central booking service, that there were substantial costs associated in handling bookings for that section of the market. And there were subsidies there that, to my way of thinking, were meaningful, rather than the Mickey Mouse scheme that we've got at the moment, the Mickey Mouse subsidy that we have at the moment. In fact, that's the situation. I can't really tell you too much about what was at the root of the demise of central booking. But as I say, there are other models around the country. South Australia seems to have quite a good system there. There's a variation of it in Sydney. But I think looking at all those, if a case can be made, well, then it's got to be considered.
Why do you need subsidies for wheelchair bookings?
Well, I think there's quite a bit of quite a lot of work involved in processing bookings into the wheelchair taxi fleet. There's the people we have to deal with. There's very little automation. Most of them are manually handled calls. And in Victoria here, just digressing a little bit from what you're talking about there, the cost, 80% of wheelchair bookings are dealt with between the passenger and a particular driver or group of drivers. The problems that we face in Victoria relate to that 20% of bookings, certainly in the metropolitan zone, which are the ASP bookings, for want of a better term, the people who suddenly want a car. And most of the problems relate to people that suddenly want a car right in the middle of a peak period or what have you, where there are just so many factors that influence getting a car to them. Do you understand where I'm going from there?
You agree there's a problem with wheelchair bookings? I mean, the data in the report suggests that waiting times for people are significantly higher than...
Yes, significantly higher. I think the average time for a wheelchair taxi was probably average, I'm saying about 26 minutes, I think, according to data that I provided, which is, and the average as far as a standard taxi is probably 10 to 12. There's no question about it. There is quite a difference between the two. And it's a function. It's a function of the spread of the metropolitan area. It's a function of the number of cars too that were available when we really produced quite some of those figures to the inquiry. I know there's more cars out there now. There's an oversupply of cars, let's face it, at this point in time.
All right, well, thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Phelps.